Okay, so continuing with our icebreaker of naming one thing that you would assume makes you different from everyone else on the call. And yes, we are operating off of assumptions, but let's pass it on to Anna. What are you thinking?
Thank you. My name is Anna Srisara. I'm a manager of customer success at an ed tech company called ClassKick. I'm from Chicago. One thing that I would assume makes me different from everyone else on this call. Gosh, this is so hard. I'm trying to think. What's something that makes me really unique? I don't want to just copy yours, Nasha May, but I feel like I might be the only one whose ethnic background is Thai. So just gonna go off of that.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be copying at all. It's unique to you.
Yeah, it's a big part of my identity. So that's like what comes to
Exactly.
mind for me.
Exactly.
Cool. I will pass it off to Matt. Have you gone yet?
Nope. Hi, all. I'm Matt Kaselik. I am Managing Director of Data Infrastructure Analytics at a national education nonprofit called Achievement Network. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Salt Lake City. The thing that makes me unique that I assume is different, though I'd be curious if not, especially amongst millennials, is I've only worked at one company since graduating from undergrad, and I've been here for almost 10 years. So if I make it till next summer, I will get a 6-week sabbatical. And so that is a very good motivator to make it to 10. So yeah. And I'll pass it to Helen.
Talk about loyalty, Matt.
No.
Sabbatical sounds really nice. I'm Helen Carpenter. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I manage a bunch of case managers in a Medicaid program. And I think I'm going out on a limb here, but one thing that makes me different from everyone else on the call is that I'm Quaker.
Nice.
But I still use technology. Like light bulbs are great.
I love it. That's awesome. Thanks for chiming in. You can pass it to someone.
Oh, sorry. Tima Smith, did I say that right?
It's Tema. Hi all. I'm Tema Smith. I'm dialing in today from Toronto, my hometown, which is where I live and work remotely. I work for the Anti-Defamation League, which is an anti-hate organization, does a lot of work it's a Jewish communal organization that does a lot of work around anti-Semitism, white nationalism, all of that really fun, rosy stuff. So it's been a really busy few days with Mar-a-Lago and the threats to the Florida Jewish community and the FBI and like just crazy times. And I manage our Jewish outreach and partnerships. So I manage all of our sort of national level partnerships with other Jewish organizations. I've been there for I think 8 months as of today. It's pretty new. Something that makes me different than people on the call is probably, I feel like a lot of us are going with identity categories, so I'm just going to do the same. I am mixed race. My mom is like Eastern European Jewish. My father's family is from the Bahamas and is Black and white and a bunch of other sort of things that people in the Caribbean tend to be mixed with. And so I'm like a dual citizen. So like for me, hybrid identity is like a really big part of how I identify, just because I'm like cross-border, cross-cultural, and all of those things. So that's me.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, so I'm supposed to pass it to somebody. Elena, have you gone? Is it Elena?
Yeah, Elena, thank you. My name's Elena. I use she, her pronouns, calling in from Brooklyn. And I'm gonna build off of what Helen was saying. I am Quaker and Jewish. So yeah, and I'm a macro social worker, and most recently was working in youth development with high school students at an after-school program. So glad to be here.
Awesome.
And then I guess I'll pass it to Christina.
Christina's passing, and so we're going to pass it to Leah. Have you gone?
I have not. I'll come off video or come on video. Hi all, I'm Leah Taraskevich. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the University of North Carolina at the Injury Prevention Research Center. And I'm in Durham, North Carolina. And this is a bit of a cheat now since people have said where they are, but I was gonna guess that no one else is in North Carolina.
Well, you're right. That's not cheating. Unless somebody dropped into the chat that they are. That is unique about you. Awesome. Feel free to pass it.
Did Maura go?
No.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. I joined a few minutes late, so I only got to hear Leah's, but my name is Maura. I tell people it's like Laura, but with an M. I work in public affairs right now for a sustainability-focused research and development company. I'm based in the greater New York City area, so it was nice to hear someone's from Brooklyn. And something that's unique about me right now, I'm also a part-time graduate student. I'm getting my MPA focused on disability rights.
That's
So
awesome.
I feel a little bit naive as far as who might still have to go, but
No, you're fine. I think everyone has gone. Please pop in if you like to go and have it. Yep, I think that's everyone. Awesome. So we have a lot of unique identities in the room. Any idea why I chose that icebreaker?
It really highlights our diversity, but also gives us things that like we discovered we had more in common than we realized. Like everyone was like, I think this is just me, but
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yep. And I noticed we have in the chat to see if anyone would be truly open or scripted issues. Yeah, so there are multiple purposes for this icebreaker. To show that we have more in common than we realize sometimes, right? You think you're the only Quaker in the room until somebody says, hey, me too. But also to highlight the fact that you don't really know what's beyond the surface until you have these conversations. I would have never, if I didn't have like the master sheet of MMC, I would have never guessed that like we'd have someone joining us from Canada. Or, you know, that like Matt's been at his job for 10 years. He's a millennial. And so a lot of times we enter spaces and we have a lot of common assumptions about who people are, or we're open to learning about them, but we don't have many opportunities outside of the workday or, you know, the work confinements to really get to know people for who they are. And so a lot of what we're going to be discussing today in terms of managing people and teams and building systems is really knowing who we are, but also knowing how to elevate and celebrate otherness, the things that make other people unique without tokenizing them. And we'll get into that also. But having a good sense of who we are, awareness of what that means for other people, but also how to create norms around finding out that information, celebrating that information, and not leaning towards our natural human tendency of bonding over all the things we have in common, which is great. But we want to take it another level and also bond and build relationships over the things that we can learn from each other, because there are such different experiences or skills or identities, traits, all of that great stuff. So you'll notice as we jump into our first section, managing people, quick time check. Knowing your North Star is the root of all of these things, knowing who you are, knowing your North Star. And so I say that not just because identity is at the foundation of this, identity, ability, so all of the isms are at the foundation of this, and it's important for you to know. But beyond that, and managing people, you're already dealing with so many different personalities and work styles, needs, demands. So even if everybody looked the same, came from the same village or city or town, and had the same complexion and the same type of hair and the same accent, you're still dealing with personalities, which is enough and a lot in and of itself. And chances are, if you're managing something or people, something's going to go wrong at some point between 9 and 5 or Monday to Friday. And it's so easy to get lost in the chaos of personality dynamics and work dynamics. So knowing your North Star, what is your guiding light, that's just going to help you in all things. Even right now, as the world continues to be a dumpster fire, knowing why we're here and what's keeping us going, and what that bright light in the darkness is just always going to be crucial. But next to that, like having that keen understanding of a lot of different things here. And one of those things is systems of oppression. So if you're not open to really like authentically sitting with what it means to be an oppressed person, to have an oppressed or marginalized identity or experience, then you won't be able to manage people as well as you would like to. Even if all of your people look the same, you're still doing a disservice, because chances are your clientele, the people who will be impacted by the work that you do, chances are they don't all look the same. And so there has to be a level of understanding somewhere along the chain of command to meet people where they are. But again, from the focus of managing your people, you want to understand what oppression looks like and what they potentially face in their lives that contribute to how they show up in a space, so you can meet them where they are and work well together. And so the role identity plays in society is something I, essentially kind of built into that just now, but knowing, what it means for a Black person to show up in a workspace, what it means for a transgender person to show up in a workspace, what it means if someone shows up to the workspace in a wheelchair, right? That's not their identity, but there's a certain way society perceives them, a certain way they experience society because of how they physically shown up. Another thing that's really important to understand as a manager of people is your positional power. And so I know a lot of folks in MMC are in mid-level management, and that puts us in a really funny position, because we might see ourselves as little old me, and I just got these couple people on the side who I guide every now and then, tell them what to do. Or you might feel like, I've got these 15 people who are constantly depending on me. But you also have, your higher up and their team who decides what you do and like the impact of your work. And, you are a part of this larger system. Either way, it's important for you to understand the power dynamics at play and how your role as a manager impacts the people who you manage and how they perceive that power that you have. And most importantly on this list is understanding your biases, you understand systems of oppression all day and the role that they play in society. But if you don't understand what your personal biases are within this society that is filled with oppression, it's not going to matter, because that knowledge is not going to reflect in your management. So knowing your biases is important so that you can work on fixing that and developing that so that it doesn't harm anyone in the workplace, and acknowledging and like accepting that we all come with biases. You're human, it's going to be there. And so like the guilt and the shame of acknowledging that, let it happen, like let it flow through you, because you can't fix what you don't acknowledge. And remembering that we all come with them based on where we're born and what we're told about other people and internalize before we even really had the chance to understand it. So you're not a bad person for having biases. You become a bad person for letting those biases control your actions and how you treat people. Building genuine relationships, I feel like that's it's obvious, right? It's a given. And like, what does it mean to build genuine relationships? And when you think about that, I think the first step is to think about, what does it look like to you when people are building genuine relationships with you? What are the things that you would like for them to be doing? Do you love when people ask you about your dog or your children? Do you love when people sit and listen to you discuss your weekend plans, or like your side hustle and your project, or if you're working on a novel, or like all these things that you're passionate about? And also knowing that the flip side of this is the way that you like for relationships to be built genuinely is not always the way that other people like for relationships to be built genuinely. And so that's why I don't have a list right here per se, for the sake of time and for the sake of not prescribing to you what's going to be different for each person. And so that you know that if you decide, I want to build a genuine relationship with Michelle, I'm going to put lunch on her calendar, and Michelle declines. And you're taken aback, because why would she do that? I'm amazing. I want to have lunch. I want to build a relationship. Maybe Michelle doesn't want to make friends in the workplace. Maybe Michelle, thanks, Christina. Maybe Michelle is just booked and she just doesn't have time for it. And she forgot to type in a message, didn't, whatever the case is. We don't want to make the assumption that Michelle just doesn't want to be bothered, and therefore, we won't work together well now because she didn't respond to my lunch request. Talk to her and get a sense of like, what is it that she likes to do? Does she want to build relationships with colleagues? If she does, maybe happy hour is more her vibe. Maybe taking a 10-minute coffee break together is more her vibe. So listening to who people are and what works well for them in order to build those relationships, instead of just operating based off of what we want, but knowing that there's often overlap around what people do to build those genuine relationships. Understanding the individual and unique needs that might vary from traditional protocol. And so this is beyond like, some people like to do lunch, some people like to do happy hour. This goes into, you have folks who are parents, you have folks who are caretakers for their elders or their siblings, you have folks who might live further out than the next person. You have folks who have all these varying needs and experiences. If you're managing all these people, you need to understand what those unique needs are, and they may vary from traditional protocol. So if you require everyone to be in the office from Monday to Friday, and you have someone commuting into New York City from Trenton, New Jersey, which is like not, well, actually I can't say it's not a thing, because people out here taking really long commutes to work. But if that person needs a hybrid schedule and you're hesitant because traditional protocol doesn't allow for it, sometimes we have to take a step back and think, well, why does this protocol exist? And is it worth me potentially losing this person on my team who I manage? Is it worth a strange relationship within the workplace around this? Sometimes, these things can't be changed, but within our power to advocate, to speak up, to change the protocols ourselves, it's always important to ask ourselves, is this protocol here because it was always here, or is it here because it's meeting the unique needs of a parent who needs to leave at 3 o'clock 2 days a week to go pick up their child, but will start the workday at 7. And I have here, if you value innovation, show it via staff engagement. Everybody's core value these days is innovation. Everybody, is just state of the art, brand new ideas. We're doing it, our way, and no one's ever seen it done like this before. And, a lot of places who are fully remote took that as their example of how innovative they are. But a lot of times when people are talking about innovation, they're talking about their product, they're talking about their services, they're not talking about how they engage with staff. And so if you're working for a company that values innovation, let's practice that by how we operate internally, and encourage that as a part of the culture too. And then lastly here for managing people, which is going to lead us into our next section, understanding optimal work conditions and varying work styles. Some people work best without the cubicles and they can be around people and socialize and interact while they're doing their work. I would never get work done in that setting and environment. And I don't know how many of y'all can relate to that, but some people need a more quiet surrounding. Some people need to be around people to get work done. Some people do their best work outside on a sunny day. Some people do their best work at home. Understanding what those conditions are and what you can allow for within your workspace, and what those work styles are, right? And Marissa's done great workshops on this. And I feel like some of you all were there in terms of understanding, if you are someone whose work style is, you want to focus on the relationship building aspect and prioritize that, or you're analytical and you want to get straight to business, or all the different aspects in between. Set norms for how team members engage with each other. Allow them to, allow that for that organic nature. But in terms of managing and keeping equity at the center as a theme, and really appreciating otherness without being obnoxious about it, you want to create those norms and how the team builds its culture together. I'll pause there for a second to see if there are any immediate responses. All right. Feel free to pop into the chat or, raise a hand. Also, I can't see all the screen. So if you are raising a hand or unmuting yourself, feel free to just chime in because I just can't see. And I'm going to try to move much more quickly through these next 2 slides for more hot seat time at the end. But in terms of managing teams, audit your hiring practices, because that's where this all begins. Are you showing the salary for reasons of not wasting people's time if it's, below what they're targeting, above what they're targeting? You want a common agenda. So collectively define the problem when you're problem solving with a team, collectively creating a vision, collectively creating those norms for engagement. You want that commonality, you want the buy-in, you want that to be led by the team so that they feel that ownership over it. And let that be the resonating mantra whenever y'all get together. Not in a way that's corny or annoying, but again, if you let people do it organically, it will continue to take on that form. In terms of shared management, you want not just a common agenda, but a common understanding of what progress looks like, what success looks like, so that you can normalize continuous learning. Accountability is going to be huge in terms of building teams that are equitable, because a lot of times folks are coming in with different learning backgrounds and experiences, and everyone wants and deserves to be better, to be challenged, to improve. But without accountability, without feedback, without learning opportunities, folks can't do that. So it's important to name. I'm also just looking at the chat to make sure I'm catching everything. In Colorado is a new law that pay range has to be included in every job post. I can't wait till that gets around to the rest of these places. And I love that y'all, Matt, your company just implemented that. I can't wait till it's the norm. And then one day we can tell our grandkids. Back in the day, they just had us applying to stuff, not knowing how much we were gonna make. Celebrate wins and grows. I mean, that's the obvious one, right? Like the same way people deserve to be challenged and grow and have accountable feedback, and not just feedback, right? Like, don't think that you can walk into a place and give people feedback and then walk away. Like when you give people feedback, especially like feedback that's hard to hear, you need to be working with them towards a plan to work towards that particular goal that they have to set because of that feedback. And that's something that if it's not carried out like intentionally to that full extent, it still becomes inequitable, because then you might just be telling somebody like, you know, your project sucked. Your project could have used more pictures, or it could have used more I don't know, detailed research, or you should have spoken to, you know, this particular CEO beforehand. You want to provide that support with the accountability. Otherwise, that can still be internalized as something that's taken personally, whether it's based on identity, whether it's based on social norm, whatever that case is. And so when I say normalize otherness without tokenizing it, for example, if I say, you know, I'm the only person in here from Ghana, or, you know, Anna, you said you're from Thailand, right?
My family is, yes.
Yes, your family.
Mhm.
And so that's something that is important to her identity. This is something important to my identity. So it might be something that we tout, or that we, you know, it's a fun fact about us. We want that to be something that is a part of the culture, but not to the extent that every time we walk into the room, you're like, oh, hey, Miss Thailand. Hey, Miss Ghana. You don't want to tokenize a person or say, well, you know, as someone from Thailand, what do you think? We want to celebrate it. We want to understand and appreciate it without going over the top and being obnoxious with it. And so I also have your like knowing team dynamics, understanding the best way to support. Sometimes when people manage teams, the reason why I have this here is managing a team and being a part of the team are such very different things. And sometimes when you're managing a team, you think you understand what the dynamics are. But for those of us who are on teams, we know that sometimes the dynamic is very different than how the manager views it. And so taking the time to like remove the hat to the extent that you can, some will argue that you can't really technically remove it, so that you really understand people at that human level and see the dynamics that exist beyond like your lens that you look at it through. And that will also help you understand the best way to support. And that whole support really goes back to like the accountability, the guidance. There are such varying needs here, right? For the different types of people who exist, who work, who you're serving, and how can you use that understanding to provide that support? And having that as a key function and feature in your management practice. And so lastly, real quick, so that we at least have about 15 minutes to chat, assessing current systems and policies. So when you're building systems, the first thing you have to do is that audit. And the main question here is, who do these systems as they exist benefit? Is it protocol or is there a purpose? And we always want to go with purpose over protocol. And that's more than just like some great alliteration, which I love. But if we look at any of our handbooks, a lot of what is going on in our companies is protocol that has existed for decades or centuries, depending on where you work. And a lot of it, not a lot of it, but some of it is without the purpose function with the protocol. Some of it did serve its purpose 100 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 months ago, but we're in vastly changing times. And sometimes you got to pull up these systems and these policies and reassess them and look for like, what is the point here? Who is this benefiting? And how can we strengthen this? And another question to ask yourself in those moments is, you know, who was out of sight and out of mind when these systems were being created? So you might be at a place that's underfunded, but if they don't, at an office that's underfunded and you're on the second or third floor, they don't have an elevator, that is an accessibility issue. Someone requested for me to even, like, for today's workshop, I should have been fully prepared to have closed captioning present. Someone sent me that reminder to put, you know, closed captioning on. Like, thinking about what is so normal and natural to me as an individual that I and the rest of society can so easily forget that this is a barrier to the next person. And having a space of continuous and open feedback to flow freely between management and team members is so crucial for that exact reason, because so many issues can be addressed if there is just like the proper system for reporting concerns. And so that's why for this section in particular, in our last couple of minutes of me chatting, reporting grievances, as you'll see here, these like sub bullets, we have all these different aspects of like working in an office and what the handbook might say. And for reporting grievances, for example, does your organization have a system for that? And what does that system mean for the people who are reporting grievances? Does it mean that their grievances are actually heard? And when I say grievances, I mean reporting an equity issue, you know, were they racialized? Did someone try to touch their hair? Did someone imply that because of their sexual identity that they're posing some sort of a threat to the company? And as well, you know, like all of the ridiculous things that people come up with that we're like, how did that happen? Those things happen every day, much more often than we recognize, because often the systems for reporting these grievances either don't exist or they are very poorly drawn out. And even more important than the reporting of the grievances is what is the protocol or policies for responding to these grievances? Because I think at the crux of everything else we've discussed is like that proactive culture building. End of the day, like management with equity at its center is rooted in a lot of that culture building and a lot of that mindful management and accountability for yourself and for others. But this aspect, like this building system section, I'm thinking about it retroactively in terms of like, how are you responding to the issues that will inevitably happen anyway? And a lot of times the response to grievances, there's not always an aligned protocol. And sometimes having the aligned protocol is even more frustrating because there's such an autopilot response that management is not learning from the issues that are becoming patterns and need to be addressed differently than they historically have been. And so I really just want to emphasize grievance systems and policies and how they play out with staff members, especially through a diversity lens from every angle. I just want to read what's in the chat real quick. Reporting grievances is so important. I feel like often we are having these conversations in smaller groups, but don't have a means to report and make change. So I'll just also speak on that real quick in terms of at a previous place of employment for me, we had people got together and created an equity committee. And over time, the equity committee started calling out things here and there and started to meet with the executive team and made a list of grievances and demanded that there be a grievance policy put into place. But when I say be mindful of the grievance policy, we at that company were asked to go and like speak to a board member who does not work within the organization at all about what your grievance is, and then the board will decide what the response is. that might be the case for other organizations. I just know realistically, a board that has no relationship with staff members and no understanding of like staff dynamics does not have the appropriate response necessarily for what's going on within the organization. Bereavement policies, for example, are something that haven't changed for years, even for a lot of companies while we're in multiple pandemics. And sometimes we need to rethink this concept of a nuclear family, which is very much a Western concept. And you get, what, 3 bereavement days if someone in your nuclear family dies, but you can't define for someone whether their aunt is or isn't closer to them than their mother is or was, whether their cousin is not just as close to them as their sister is. And so let people grieve. Like, don't try to define for them when and how and where they can grieve. Like, we need to reassess some of these things. And so it always comes back to, you know, what is the purpose of this protocol? Who is in mind or who might be being left out as we think through some of these processes. So I'm going to stop my share so that I can stop talking. And I want to hear thoughts, questions. Since we only have about 12 minutes left, I won't put us into breakout groups unless folks feel more comfortable and prefer that, but want to hear if there are challenges that anyone wants to troubleshoot with the group, if anything I said resonated and just leaves questions that you want to ask and build on, just opening up the floor for any of that.
Yeah, I mean, something that I was thinking of as you were talking about sort of policies, procedures, grievance, all of that sort of stuff, it sort of linked back to something you were talking about earlier about middle managers. So I'm just curious about this is like a giant question, and it probably like changes depending on the size of an organization, but like I'm in a 400 staff organization kind of a thing. Just wondering, you know, your thoughts on like when you don't actually have a huge amount of impact over the sort of equitability of sort of how the organization functions, how do you still center management with your team or center equity with your team as a manager?
Yeah, and that's a really tough one, especially when it comes to these policies at such a large organization. I definitely understand that question. And I think that a part of it is building relationships with other managers at your level, because, you know, I'm sure they're all dealing with the same thing. And I don't know what the dynamics are within your organization, but I know that managers, like a team of mid-level managers coming together on behalf of their team strengthens the ask. So if you have, I don't know, 10 people on your team or 5 people on your team, I would say, you know, advocate to the extent that you feel comfortable letting leadership know, or like your direct supervisor, whoever you feel like might be an advocate for you that's higher up in the organization, to say, on behalf of my staff, you know, I've noticed that these policies exist in a way that's harmful to them and would love for us to reconsider how they exist in the company. But that's even more powerful if you have 3 other mid-level managers coming to you and you're representing 15, 20, 30 staff members. So it's really about going to the right person who's higher up, not necessarily a particular position, but knowing like what your resources for advocating for yourselves within the organization are. If you have ERGs, employee resource groups, affinity groups, those are all different routes you can take. But I also want to open it up to see if anyone else has thoughts they'd like to share. I know some stuff is going on in the chat. All right, so I'm seeing who's involved in this conversation, at what point is really important. Frequently, people don't feel comfortable using grievance processes because there are repercussions for employees, which is true. And guess what? If there are repercussions, you have a lawsuit, my friend, because that is illegal. So I know that doesn't quell most fears because who has time for that, but it's the truth. I'm
I
sorry,
also
you were gonna
think
say something.
it's not just grievances around race though, and like protected classes. There are lots of grievances that employees have when they feel like they're not being heard and respected
Mhm,
that might not result in their ability to like start a lawsuit,
right.
or like the case isn't clear enough. It's a microaggression.
Mhm,
So it's still like worth reporting it, especially if the microaggressions keep happening.
mhm.
But a lawsuit might not be a reasonable solution to the problem because no lawyer is going to take that on.
No, yeah.
Unfortunately, in our current climate. So I think that like so many times when people submit grievances, like it automatically goes back to their supervisor to like have a conversation with the employee.
Mhm,
And some supervisors and managers can do that in a manner that like honors the grievance and that the employee felt disrespected. And sometimes some managers like, it's not a big deal. Why did you bring this up?
yeah.
And like, so in a process where like that is the final conversation, it's not, no matter what kind of grievance policies you have, if that's the end result, like that's not helpful either.
No, you're definitely raising a really good and important point, because yes, I agree, and I've seen it play out, and I think that within your team is essentially a microcosm of the larger organization, and so while you might not be able to enact that change at the larger scale because all of that stuff circles back to you as the manager anyhow. I think, and maybe we need a separate like PD or like conversation around like what to do when those grievances come back to you, how to have those difficult conversations around equity, with the feedback, all the things that Marissa talks us through. But I think you have to treat your team as its own organization in those cases. And when the grievance comes back to you, you address the concern and make that modification within your team dynamics. And so it sounds a little pie in the sky, but essentially like making your team the organization that you wish your larger organization was, is like understanding your locus of control, and that the more that other people see like how your team works and why, they'll understand that, but also documenting those grievances. Like once they come and, do their little process and loop circle back to you, making sure that like your teammates who are experiencing these things are documenting them, description, date, time, if, applicable, so that if it does become such a pattern that it can become something larger scale. And unfortunately, a lot of these things, like they cut so deep, but lawsuits aren't the practical solution. You have the proof over time, and they have the proof, you have the proof. And if everybody is documenting, eventually all of you will be able to get together and enact some sort of change. And it is about that advocacy. It is about applying the pressure. And that is going to come from having a higher up advocate who will advocate for you so that you don't have to worry about risking your job while you advocate for your staff members who are concerned about risking their employment by advocating for themselves. And so it's like, who can I trust up there to, once I have this date, like this proof, to, pass it along to that person. But in the meantime, like creating those solutions within like your team and your locus of control. I see. And Kai, you have a really great question here. I want to try and answer in the last couple of minutes too. Supporting equitable practices and policies for contractors, part-time folks, gig workers. That's a really great question, Kai. I think, and to be completely honest, it's not an area that I have focused on, but I think that like if there is a particular role at the organization that oversees like contractors, part-time folks who come in, I think there's particular training about like that onboarding process and ensuring equitable practices for that. I don't know if it's a class of employee or like that type of employee, so that their point person has the tools and resources needed to give them the same respect as a full-time worker, as the CEO. Like everybody should be treated, and we know this is not true, but like CEO, the janitor, like everybody should have the same level of respect. And if that sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with the chat. If that is falling short, which is just the reality, the training of individuals who are responsible for others, to me, is what it's always going to come down to. And I know that like a challenge there is, you know, does the leadership at this organization find it necessary to require training for the people who are responsible for external vendors and contractors, et cetera. And so that would be the main thing that I would say. But again, I want to kind of pause to see if anyone has like better or different ideas in terms of supporting gig workers, for example, in equitable practices. And if not, are there any final thoughts before we close out?
You could still try to submit a grievance against a gig worker. Like, even if that's what I would do, and just build your case kind of in the same way, Shorme, you were talking about, like those microaggressions, like just have examples. Even if like nothing is followed up on, if you have those, like a whole stack of like, this is all the ways our staff, our full-time people feel disrespected by this gig worker, then you can probably make the case and say, this person needs to go away so that we can keep our full-time people. And their gig worker, we can find someone else.
And I'm pretty sure under like the discrimination and harassment laws, like we just had to do our training on this. So because I manage a team in multiple states, I did like the federal level one. Gig workers are covered under anything that would be considered discrimination or harassment. So as well as contractors.
Awesome. That's really good to know. Thank you, Helen and Tema, for adding that in. Any other thoughts? I know we're at time. But I really, yeah, Maura?
I was just going to say this is separate, but I appreciated your comment about, well, the way I took it was around disenfranchised grief and like the lack of acknowledgement for, I think it creates more disenfranchisement based on some of the policies that are currently in place. And one of the things I think about is pet loss and how impactful that can be. So less of a question, just I appreciated the recognition of our dated policies.
Yeah, and that's why those audits are so important. And I also wanted to kind of build on what Helen said in terms of like, you know, like having that list ready. So again, at my previous place of employment, we ended up doing an equity audit just as an equity committee. And so we had folks just write on like a Post-it, like what were your name, any inequitable experiences that you've had within this workplace, and people put them up on the wall in terms of like which categories they fell into. And then we shared, and a lot of stuff that you would not believe came up because no one's being asked these questions, right? Like if you were to ask someone, like everybody probably have a story, but management isn't prioritizing like the experiences of people inside, unfortunately. But then what we did was with a Google form, created the space for the rest of the organization to contribute any experiences that they've had. And we were able to then analyze the patterns and had a very strong case of what to bring to leadership with recommendations. Granted, this is a 50-person organization. So I do not want to say this saying like, you should be able to go do it at Google or, 400 people. No, but in terms of like tools that I have seen work very well or processes that exist, but I do know that like different workspaces have different contexts and all that stuff. But that's awesome. Yes. And always recommend going through a third party if the org has the budget for it, because the eyes see everything but themselves. So, but yeah, no, so just to kind of wrap this up, and I closed out before we got to the last slide, because I was excited to hear y'all's thoughts and voices. But essentially, if anything stays with you, think about effective and equitable management as gardening, and you're planting the seeds for that type of environment that you want to flourish. And a part of that really does require disrupting the systems as they exist, because they weren't problematic, you wouldn't need to, but we're having this conversation for a reason. So as much as, we all need to maintain our employment, times are crazy right now, being an effective and equitable manager does require disrupting systems. And there's so many different ways to do that. But again, you're planting the seeds and changing the environment for the betterment of yourself and your people and your team and the organization at large, even if they can't see it like that yet. But I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll drop my email address if anybody wants to stay in touch or has questions. But you also know you can find me on our Slack channel too. So take care, enjoy the rest of your day.